Is there a bottom part to my gavel I'm supposed to have or no? Oh, wow.
Good question.
Didn't I used to have a bottom part to my gavel?
Okay, just hit hard.
Good evening and welcome to the meeting of November 4th, 2024 of the Arlington County Planning Commission. I am Commissioner Steinberger, Chair. Tonight, the Commission will consider the following items. If you are here for the CC Block W plan, this item will not be discussed. There will be no Q&A nor public comment period. The item will come before the Planning Commission at our December meeting. 2 form-based code use permits, the development of townhomes that includes a vacation of an easement and other for the development of multifamily dwelling units and ground floor retail uses. A request to adopt items related to the CMRI, Commercial Market Resilience Initiative, transformation of commercial office buildings. Before we begin, I would like to share a few logistical points for all participants joining the meeting remotely and in person. For presenters and speakers joining us through Microsoft Teams, please keep your phones and other electronic devices muted until you are called upon by the clerk. Please turn off the sound to any devices around you to minimize interference. Please keep your cameras off until the clerk announces your name to speak. When called upon, you must unmute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon that is in the meeting command bar at the top of the screen. Neither the moderator nor the clerk have the ability to unmute your mic. Once you have spoken, please remute your mics and turn your cameras off. If you're dialing in by phone to join the meeting, press *6 to unmute. Public speakers will be called upon by the clerk at an assigned time. Pre-registration and email confirmation to speak at tonight's hearing was required. We are not able to accommodate additional speakers. All speakers, virtual and hybrid, will receive 2 minutes to comment as an individual. Only representatives of a county board appointed advisory groups or committee and/or commission will receive a 3-minute comment period. A timer will be displayed on the screen if speaking virtually, and speakers in person will follow the timer stationed on the podium. Audio of tonight's meeting is available via phone. If commissioners, presenters, or speakers lose internet connectivity, please reconnect by phone. However, if you are dialing in by phone and unable to see the screen, we will provide an audible 30-second warning to wrap up your comments. You'll be muted when your time has expired. The meeting chat is active for presenters or commissioners who need technical assistance only. Again, technical assistance only. Please do not use the meeting chat for discussion, public comment, questions on agenda items, or requests for further information. All public comment must be shared verbally for the record during the assigned public testimony period. Tonight's meeting will be available for review through the YouTube and Microsoft Teams platforms in real time. The links have been provided on the Planning Commission website. The meetings will also be available for review with closed captioning on Comcast Xfinity channels 25 and 1085, Verizon Fios channels 39 and 40, within 24 to 48 hours after the adjournment of the meeting. Lastly, this is a public forum. Tonight's meeting will be recorded and posted on the county website via a link to YouTube as stated. All information associated with tonight's meeting, whether written or spoken, is subject to the Virginia Freedom of Information Act requirements. Madam Clerk, please call the first item.
Thank you. Our first item for the evening is regarding the Crystal City Block Plan, the rezoning, the block plan, the site plan amendment, and the new site plan. Since this item will not be discussed in its entirety and deferred to our December Planning Commission meeting, we have Matt Pfeiffer, our site plan supervisor and coordinator, to speak on this item and the deferral.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Members of the Commission, for the record, my name is Matt Pfeiffer. As Giselle mentioned, this item will not be discussed tonight. This was originally scheduled for your November meeting. The applicant did request deferral to a date certain, the December meeting. However, because this was advertised twice for the Planning Commission agenda, you will hear it tonight, but we are recommending that you take the action of deferral again to the date certain December meeting for all of the items associated with the Crystal City Block Plan, Block W, site plan, Crystal City Block Plan, rezoning, and minor site plan amendment. Thank you.
I presume we need to make a motion, Earl?
Yes, you would need
We
to
do
make
it
a
by
motion.
unanimous consent. We could do it? Okay. Seeking unanimous consent to defer item 1 related to Crystal City Block Plan W and the associated items until the December meeting. Okay. Hearing no objection, the matter passes by unanimous consent. Thank you. Madam Clerk, can you please call the second item?
Item number 2, FBCN 24-00001 is a use permit for the development of 16 townhomes in accordance with the Columbia Pike Form-Based Code. We have Olivia Sontag and Mike Haluski to present this item with vacation of easement tonight.
Hi, good evening. Olivia Sontag with the Arlington County Planning Division. I'm joined by Michael Haluski with our Real Estate Bureau and also Joanne Gabor from DES. So the staff presentation will focus primarily on the form-based code compliance and the requested modifications, and then the applicant has also prepared a presentation with more details on the site design. So this is a form-based code use permit for townhomes located at 2300 9th Street. There are 2 items for your consideration. The first is the use permit for the development of 16 townhomes in accordance with the form-based code with a modification of the streetscape details located at 2300 9th Street. And then the second item is a vacation of a portion of an easement for public street and utility purposes located on property owned by Arlington Title LLC and located at 2300 9th Street. So the site is located on the eastern end of the Pike. The GLUP designation is service commercial, and it's located within Note 8, which is the Special Revitalization District for commercial nodes. And the site is bound by South Adams Street, 9th Street, and South Wayne Street. Is located directly behind the Sienna Park development. So the applicant has opted to redevelop the site using the form-based code optional zoning tool. The site is located within the commercial form-based code town center regulating plan. The underlying zoning is CO mixed use district. The property is over 40,000 square feet in size. And you can see here that the BES frontage, the building envelope standards frontage, is designated as local on all 3 sides. There's also an existing alley on the southern portion of the site that serves the Sienna Park property. However, that alley is located below grade and is not accessible by this site. So this site is proposing access off of 9th Street. So I'll provide an overview of the development proposal. Again, the applicant has some more detailed slides with additional graphics. But the applicant does propose to demolish the existing office building and garage that's currently governed by Site Plan 71. That site plan would be abandoned as part of this conditions of this use permit. They propose to develop 3-story townhomes with attic stories, a total of 16 units with 32 vehicle parking spaces. Those are provided both in proposed garages and within driveway areas. They're also proposing 3 visitor parking spaces on South Adams Street. And then about 4,700 square feet of private open space on the southern end of the site. They also propose unit number 11, which fronts South 9th Street, as a 0-step entry and exit. Since the form-based code advisory working group meeting, where interest in having a 0-step entry unit was expressed, the applicant has worked to try to find a solution, try to find a unit to accommodate this. So since that time, but unfortunately, after we published the Planning Commission report, the applicant has revised their plans to incorporate that. This means they no longer need the modification for the height relative to the fronting sidewalk. They do, however, still need a modification to the streetscape details in the event that the existing Capital Bike Share station along South Wayne Street hasn't moved by the time of building permit issuance for the phase along South Wayne Street. Then it allows the applicant to not be responsible for planting those 3 street trees. And because of those circumstances, staff is supportive of that scenario. So this is just a summary of the review process. The final submission came in September of this year. The Form-Based Code Advisory Working Group reviewed this back on September 18th. The applicant also held a community meeting on October 8th. And then we anticipate going to the county board with this item on November 16th. Again, at the Form-Based Code Advisory Working Group meeting, there was interest in providing the zero-step entry. This is not a requirement of the commercial form-based code, but the applicant has opted to provide this. And then at the community meeting, general questions were expressed about just the timing of construction, where staging might occur, and some of the streetscape improvements, which the applicant can share more information on if interested. And now I'd like to invite Michael Haluski to present the vacation portion of this application.
Thanks, Ms. Sontag. Again, I'm Michael Haluski with the DES Real Estate Bureau. With this project, we have a small vacation that is proposed pretty much all of 9th Street to the center line on this property, and then the sidewalk wrapping around South Wayne Street is covered by a street utilities easement that was dedicated to the county in 1969. And so based on where the required building line is in the regulating plan, that actually goes into that easement area. So on the South Wayne Street frontage, there's a little bit of a corner of Unit 12, and then also the stoops along the facade that enter into that existing easement area. So it is 296 square feet of that easement that is proposed to be vacated. From the back of curb to the center line, both on the 9th Street side and on the South Adams Street side, the applicant is proposing to dedicate those areas in fee simple to the county for street purposes to replace the existing easement. This is a plat for the vacation. It's a little hard to see because it's small, but there's 296 square feet just right along the front of those 5 units along South Wayne Street. That's the area of the proposed vacation.
All right, and with that, staff is recommending approval of the subject use permit, as well as finding that the ordinance of vacation is substantially in accord with the comprehensive plan. And I believe the applicant has a presentation prepared.
Thank you, Ms. Sontag. Applicant, when you're ready.
Hi, good evening, Chair Steinberger, members of the Planning Commission. My name is Lauren Riley. I'm with Walsh Colucci. We represent the applicant in this case, BCN Homes. I'm joined tonight by the applicant team behind me, which includes folks from BCN Homes, as well as our civil engineer and our architect for the project. Would also like to thank Ms. Sontag and Mr. Haluski for their introduction, detailed overview of the proposal here. And I'd just like to start by walking you around. Oh, it would help if you could see my presentation. If you could give me just a moment. Apologies, a few technical issues. Okay, here we go. So here's some existing photos of the site. As Ms. Sontag noted, it's in the commercial form-based code. It's just north of the Sienna Park Apartments off of Columbia Pike as you walk up South Wayne or Adams Street. If you walk around the site today, you'll see a vintage 1970s office building, 7 stories, set back far from the street. Not particularly pedestrian friendly here, very little landscaping, very little street trees. And you can also see here in the second image where that Capital Bike Share station is temporarily located here along South Wayne Street, just for reference. The applicant here is excited to take this opportunity to demolish this aging office building that's been around since the 1970s and really implement the vision of the form-based code to develop buildings closer to the street, improve that streetscape here along 9th, Wayne, and Adams Street with the proposed townhouse development. As Ms. Sontag mentioned, the application includes 16 new townhomes along South Adams Street, 9th Street, and Wayne Street. Those that are located along South Adams and South Wayne townhomes 1 through 5 and townhomes 12 through 16. Those are 20-foot wide townhomes that'll have room for a 2-car garage. Those that are fronting 9th Street South, these are about 16 feet wide. We'll have one car garage and 1 tandem space behind in the driveway. And speaking of parking, we're able to provide 35 parking spaces on site, which is more than the form-based code requirement through the parking in the garages, as well as new on-street spaces here at South Adams, where we're closing that existing 3rd curb cut on the property and providing 3 new on-street parking spaces for pickup and drop-off and visitor spaces as well. The site will be accessed by residents from 9th Street South, these 2 curb cuts here in the north where there's currently roughly in the same place where there's curb cuts today. As Ms. Sontag mentioned, we'll be providing open contiguous lot area, a few hundred square feet more than required by the form-based code at the back of the site here, where there's lawn and landscaping. We'll also be providing planters here that will serve as our stormwater management facilities. And we originally, when we filed this application back in March, we had originally requested a modification for the stoop height here at Unit 11 because of the grade, how it falls down from South Wayne Street to South Adams Street. When constructing these townhomes, they'll be constructed in pairs and the slab is poured on grade. And so that way the floor-to-floor heights match for all the stories going upward. And because Unit 11 sat highest on the hill there relative to the fronting sidewalk, it was not able to meet either the form-based code requirement of a stoop 3 to 5 feet above the fronting sidewalk elevation or an at-grade entrance. Since then, we've gone to the advisory working group and held our community meeting in September and October. While there's general support from the community and the OG for the proposed development project, as Ms. Sontag mentioned, we did hear questions and concerns about this unit and why it's not able to provide a 0-step entry or otherwise meet the form-based code requirements. Since that time, our design team has been able to work on the grading and the floor plan for this unit. And we no longer need that modification as we're able to bring that entrance down to grade. And I'll show you how we're able to do that in just a moment here. But do quickly want to show you generally the floor plans for the 2 unit types here. This is the floor plan for the 16-foot wide townhomes. And you can see here garage, 1-car garage in the back with bedroom. And as you go up, kitchen and bedrooms on the 3rd floor. And then in that attic story, with a room and a rooftop terrace here in the back. Then very similar floor plan for the 20-foot wide townhome units, 2-car garage in the back, and then similar floor plans as you go up to that attic story with a terrace there. And then specific to Unit 11, what we were able to do, instead of keeping that entrance at 2 feet instead of at grade, either at grade or 3 to 5 feet is required by the code. Design team was able to look at this. We were able to lower this portion of the ground floor here by 2 feet, and we're still able to stay within the maximum floor-to-floor height of the form-based code by adding a few more steps down here to deal with that additional height, move this bedroom wall inward to provide clearance through the unit, and remove some steps in the back as well from the garage. And you can see how that's implemented here in the elevation to your right, where we're providing that garden wall and landscaping required by the code, and then that at-grade entrance there at Unit 11. Then more generally, walking you around the site, the proposed elevations. This is 9th Street. And so you can see here, Unit 11 on the left, and then as the grade steps down, these townhomes are paired together as 2 as they step down the street down to Unit 6. Here's the South Wayne Street elevation on the east side. And then the Adams Street elevation, which is a mirror of that on the west side of the site. And then quickly just to walk you through some perspectives and materials here. These townhomes will be a mixture of brick and siding and architectural materials in compliance with the form-based code requirements. This is a view here looking down 9th Street from the corner of South Wayne. taking you to the other side here, you're standing on South Adams looking down 9th Street at these row of townhomes here. Zoomed out a little bit here at the corner of Wayne and 9th so you can see how we're generally improving the streetscape here, adding trees, activating this area. And then here pulling out at the corner of South Adams and 9th Street, you can see here where this cars is where the 3 new on-street spaces will be provided. And that concludes our presentation. Myself and the design team are here, happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have public speakers?
We do not.
Okay. Do we have county commissions or other bodies that wish to be heard?
We do not.
Great. Was this heard by the transportation? Okay.
Yeah,
Way.
the only part of this that was heard by the Transportation Commission was the vacation of the easement, and that was voted on unanimously to find that it did not violate the comprehensive, that it consistent with the comprehensive plan. Again, it was unanimous, and I think there was no discussion either on it.
Thank you, Commissioner, tell me, did any other, did zoning or anything hear this? Anybody? No? Okay. So I don't know that there was anyone who was sort of responsible for topics on this one. I don't know. Does anyone have any topics that they would like to throw out to the group for this particular? Okay. I do want to talk a little bit about the entrance, kind of the change that you're able to make to get that to grade 0. Does anyone have any other topics, or just we can kind of have free form discussion? Okay, given that that's the only topic I came up with, it'll just be a free form discussion, but I'll start there because I can. And I'll recognize myself again because I can. I really what I just want to I have a question, but I also kind of want to it's more like a thank you as well. I'm so glad when we have applicants who, we go through the iterative process, we get community feedback, we hear, hey, this is what they're concerned about, is and a modification really needed here? Are we able to do something to get, down to grade 0? And you heard the feedback, you took action on it, and you thought creatively about how to fix the problem. Any other applicants listening, that's a great way to go about things. It builds a lot of goodwill with the community, and it really, the process works when you're hearing feedback and you're able to take that and come up with a creative solution. So kudos. And this may just be a clarification. This is where the question part is. Clarification wise, with this now being a 0 level sum entry, does that make it ADA accessible? This may just be, I just want to understand what that connection or not connection is.
Right. Yes, Chair Steinberger, there is not really an association with the 0-step entry and accessibility. 0-step entry really just means an at-grade entrance from the sidewalk. And then in terms of the building code type that these townhomes are constructed under, this would not be considered ADA accessible.
Thank you. Commissioner Sarli.
Following up on the chair's comments, I would encourage the applicant to create in the plan, create the opportunity for future placement of an elevator, because then that would allow that unit to become ADA accessible, although not the code compliant ADA accessible, but someone with mobility difficulties could, then have an elevator installed and have access to all levels of the home.
I will associate myself with Commissioner Sarli's comments. I think, we do, generally the ability to have, any of the new units, any of the new housing that's coming online in Arlington, to have that be available to, all members of the community, including those who might have disabilities, I think has been a real focal point of this commission, for as long as I've been on the commission. And at this point, that's a while. So thank you. Any other commissioners with questions or seeking comments? Commissioner, tell me.
I guess the only comment I have on this is that these changes, this has come before us for a couple of fairly minor things as far as the variations from the form-based code. I would like it in the future, we could find some way that even these don't have to come to us in the spirit of the form-based code. If there could be some way that we could find that if within a certain tolerances, a variation could be handled administratively, it would save everybody a lot of time and expense. Again, these are fairly minor variations that do not violate the spirit of the form-based code in any way. So, I would encourage us to think about some way that we could deal with these type of variations, that we don't have to go through this, adding an extra month to the process. So, otherwise, obviously, I'm voting for this.
I will also associate myself with those comments, although I suspect those comments are more geared towards staff than, the applicant. Commissioner Weir.
Thank you. This question has been asked here before, but for our benefit and for mine, Ms. Sontag, could you talk us through the two different kinds of use permits in the Columbia Pike form-based code? Colloquially, I have called, I think I've referred to them and heard them referred to as a by right use permit, and I don't know what we call the other one, but I think it might be helpful to know that there are two different levels of process under the Columbia Pike form-based code, and to get some brief background on what channels a project one way versus another.
Sure. So at least under the commercial form-based code, there are a couple different thresholds that allow you to keep an application administrative, which then would not be required to go before the Planning Commission and the County Board. It would just result in a letter that the zoning administrator would issue. So sites do have to be under 40,000 square feet. As soon as the property is over that, it does require a use permit. The second item, let's say the property was, under the 40,000 square feet, but they're requesting any form of modification allowed under the form-based code, that would also require them to go through the use permit process. And that's the case for this application, both because it's over 40,000 square feet and because of the modification requested.
But is it the case that technically it's a use permit even if it's administrative, or am I missing something? Because I think I have at the OG meeting and its meetings, and it's entirely possible that it's just mishearing and miscommunication, and if that's the case, I appreciate that clarification as well. But I have heard talk about use permits requests that are subject to an administrative review process under one of the form-based codes versus use permit processes that have to come to Planning Commission. And maybe you're about to tell me that I've simply misunderstood, but if that's the case, I'd be grateful to know that as well.
No, not at all. We still have to verify compliance with any application coming in through the form-based code. So we still do that by bringing the item to the form-based code advisory working group via that checklist that verifies that they're meeting every aspect of the code. If at that point they aren't requesting modifications, they don't require a use permit, then we could take the item to the zoning administrator for administrative approval, and the Planning Commission would never see the item. But if they do require something, then that's when we schedule that Planning Commission meeting.
And then one last question, Madam Chair, if I may. The 40,000 square feet, is that that's not lot, that's building, right? And if it's
property,
it's the property size itself. Okay,
Yep.
So if the property is 40,000 square feet, right, it could be, with whatever FA, it could be more dense than a 40,000 square foot building, but the property is okay. I think I've got you. Thank you.
Commissioner Weir answered his own second question. Any other questions from the commission? Commissioner Sarli, and then I'm going to check and see if any of our virtual attendees have questions. But Commissioner
I have a little bit of a comment, not so much a question, with a little bit of irony that tonight we're going to be talking about adaptive reuse amendments, that I'm a little bit sad to see an 8-story steel and concrete building with an underground 2-level underground garage being torn down, demolished. From the environmental aspect, this is a huge, huge cost that we're incurring. I don't mean to take away from the project and the applicant, but this is one of those opportunities that I think we could have sort of perhaps as a community tried to rally around. The footprint of the building's fairly skinny, so it's actually really viable to have affordable housing or and I know that the sort of from the developer perspective, penciling out structures with all these unknowns are usually very difficult and not attractive, and it's a lot easier to just put a number, demolish it, remove it, and then do the thing. But again, as a community, and insofar as we're really interested in preserving these sort of massive embodied energy structures, I think it is a little bit sad in that tone, not to be too much of a downer. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Sarli. Do we have any feedback from virtual commissioners? Okay, hearing nothing. Is there any further discussion of the Planning Commission? Okay. I believe we may be ready for a motion.
We're handling the application apart from the vacation. So the motion that you're entertaining is just on the entitlement, right?
Yes, and then I believe the vacation would be separate. Yes.
All right, thank you.
I may have actually mapped that out if you want to take a stab at crossing out what's no longer required. I think I may have done that correctly. If not, do something else.
Okay. Before anyone seconds this, I just want to get, I would ask my colleagues' indulgence to not second it until we hear from staff that, never mind, we can just do them. If we have to amend it, we can do it by unanimous consent. I move that the Planning Commission recommend that the County Board approve the subject use permit for the development of 16 townhomes in accordance with the Columbia Pike Form-Based Code, Article 11.1 of the Zoning Ordinance Appendix A, with modifications for streetscape details subject to the conditions of the staff report.
I'll second that.
The motion has been made and seconded, and staff is not telling me we did it wrong, so I'm assuming we did it correctly. Okay.
And for the benefit of colleagues, the manager's recommendation includes a reference to the modification for the first floor, since that's no longer being sought. That difference from the manager's recommendation on the record is what the chair and I were going back and forth about.
That's what I crossed out. Okay, so the motion has been made by Commissioner Weir and seconded by Commissioner Lantelmi. Any further discussion at this time? Okay. Then we will move to a vote as soon as I have my little table ready. Commissioner Begley?
Aye.
Commissioner Weir?
Aye.
Commissioner Lantelmi?
Aye.
Commissioner Robertson?
Aye.
Commissioner Sarli?
Aye.
Commissioner Streiner?
Aye.
Do I have any other virtual commissioners? Okay. Commissioner Steinberger, aye. The motion passes 7-0. Thank you. And now I believe we need a motion on the vacation. Someone have that motion ready that they can make for us? Commissioner Weir? Huh? Oh, it's in front of us.
Yeah.
Great,
and
Commissioner Weir.
Before, if I can ask a question.
Of course.
I think the answer is now made clear, but just to confirm, we are not being asked to make recommendations to the board as to the staff's recommendation for the vacation, correct? We are only being asked to make the finding. There are 2 manager recommendations in the staff report, and I just want to be certain that we're not failing to act on any particular item.
Yes, that's correct. It's just the finding.
Just the finding. Thank you. So in that case, Madam Chair, I move that the Planning Commission find that the ordinance of vacation to vacate a portion of an easement for public street and utilities purposes located on property owned by Arlington Title LLC and located at 2300 9th Street South, RPC number 25-017-044 with conditions is substantially in accord with the comprehensive plan of Arlington County, Virginia.
I'll second that.
Seconded by Commissioner Lantelmi. Thank you both. Any further discussion? No. Okay. We move to the voting portion. Mr. Bagley?
Aye.
Commissioner Weir,
Aye.
Commissioner Lantomi,
Aye.
Commissioner Robertson,
Aye.
Commissioner Sarley,
Aye.
Commissioner Steiner,
Aye.
Commissioner Steinberger, aye. This motion also passes 7-0. Thank you very much to the applicant and to staff. You guys are done. Once we've resettled, I will ask Madam Clerk to call the second item. The third item? The third item.
Madam Chair, could you give us just 1 second?
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, I'll go ahead and announce. Thank you for waiting. Item number 3 is FBCN 22-00002, a use permit for the development of 88 multiple family dwelling units and ground floor retail uses with modifications for the required building lines and streetscape details, et cetera, et cetera. We have, again, Ms. Olivia Sontag to present this item and soon to be Rob Gibson from DES to join us as well.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Yes, Olivia Sontag here again. Rob Gibson is with DES is on his way. Here he is. I'll again focus just on demonstrating the form-based code compliance, highlighting the form-based code modifications that the applicant has requested, and then the applicant will focus on the site design. So this is a use permit, Columbia Pike form-based code use permit for a multifamily building located at 2801 Columbia Pike. The item for consideration is this use permit for the development of 88 multifamily dwelling units and ground floor retail uses with modifications to the required building lines and streetscape details, and approval of 1 bonus story as allowed to incorporate the preserved historic facades for the property. So the site is located on the northeast corner of South Walter Reed and Columbia Pike. The site currently has a 2-story office building with ground floor retail. The GLUP designation is service commercial, and similar to the last item you heard, this item is within the commercial form-based code district under the special revitalization plan note 8 on the GLUP. So the applicant has also opted to develop under the commercial form-based code. The site is within the Columbia Pike Town Center Regulating Plan. The underlying zoning is C2, Service Commercial Community Business District, and the property is just under 20,000 square feet. So you'll see here that the existing building is denoted with a historic building designation, so envisioned for facade preservation in the form-based code and identified on the historic resources inventory as an important site. And the frontages along both the Columbia Pike and the South Walter Reed frontage are Main Street designation, which informs the type of form of development for the site. So the applicant proposes to preserve the 2-story historic facade in place, and then proposes a total of 7 stories, a multifamily building with a 1-story bonus, Ground floor retail of about 6,500 square feet. This totals 88 units, primarily 1 and 2 bedroom, 88 residential parking spaces in a below grade parking structure. A total of 42 bicycle parking spaces provided between secure parking in the garage and some on-street spaces. And then about 2,800 square feet of private open space provided on the second floor courtyard and the rooftop amenity. There are also quite a number of streetscape and frontage improvements associated with this development. So on Columbia Pike, a transit station is being incorporated with a 9.5-inch curb height and a shelter, which has been recessed into the historic facade, as well as a 6-foot minimum sidewalk width, and then a street tree zone, which includes 1 street tree at the back of the transit station. And then on the South Walter Reed Drive side of the street, there's also a curb extension and a transit island with a 9.5-inch curb height, an on-street bike lane, protected bike lane through this area, a 6-foot minimum sidewalk width, and then 3 trees and above grade planters. So this application has requested 3 modifications to the form-based code, and I'll go through each of those. But these modifications are identified in the form-based code and can be requested with approval by the county board. So the 3 modifications include that bonus story. The applicant is allowed up to 2 bonus stories, but must stay within the maximum height allowed for the site. So they have proposed 1 bonus story. And then the 2 modifications requested are to those required building lines for the provision of the historic facades, as well as the streetscape details, which includes the provision of street trees for the site. So here's a summary of the first modification. Again, the form-based code does allow these modifications for required building lines in order to preserve historic facades. So the proposed upper story required building lines in this case are 4 feet forward of the required building line along Columbia Pike, and 1 foot forward of the required building line on Walter Reed Drive. So otherwise, if this were a brand new construction, they would have to be compliant with those required building line locations. The HLRB and the DRC did review this project and were supportive of keeping the building facade in its current location and not moving it back. Part of the reason for that is if it was moved back to comply with the required building line locations, it would require a reduction of the facade on both the Columbia Pike frontage as well as the Walter Reed frontage. And the reason being is that the existing facade abuts the property line, the adjacent property line along Columbia Pike. So by moving it in, we would have to shave off a portion of that. And then on the Walter Reed side, moving that would preclude access to the alley for the building. So the HLRB was supportive of keeping it in this current location, but providing a 3 to 4 foot step back of floors 3 to 7 for the new construction above, which you can see here in this diagram shown in the green line. And then also they were supportive of incorporating the transit shelter into the existing facade and found that this was a creative solution given the narrow streetscape width along Columbia Pike. And then the applicant has also incorporated at the HLRB's recommendation this streamlined modern architecture on those new construction floors above, including on the bonus story. And then the second modification was to the streetscape details. The form-based code also allows modifications for these streetscape details, including the placement and spacing of street trees. The form-based code requires a 2-foot shy zone, 6-foot clear sidewalk, 6-foot furniture zone, and street trees placed at 25 to 30 feet on center. Although the tree planting pattern may be interrupted by transit stops and transit stations, which this site has 2, 1 in each frontage. So on the Columbia Pike side, there is that 60-foot transit station. Three existing street trees are also being removed as part of the Columbia Pike Multimodal Streets Improvement Project. And the applicant was able to replant one street tree outside of the transit station. You can see that here on the corner of the building, and it's outside of this 60-foot long transit station that needs to remain clear for bus access. And then on the South Walter Reed Drive side, we also have an approximately 60-foot transit island and extent along that frontage that requires that 9.5-inch curb. The Walter Reed frontage doesn't have any existing street trees today. There are an impressive amount of existing utilities within this streetscape, including in the curb extension that's proposed that continues from Columbia Pike and then about to the middle of the property. So the applicant was unable to plant street trees here, but they are proposing 3 small trees and above ground planters in this location. And then the third modification is for that bonus story. Again, the form-based code allows for up to 2 bonus stories, not to exceed the maximum height. The Main Street BES allows a minimum of 3 stories, but a maximum of 6 stories with a maximum height of 94 feet. So the applicant has proposed a total of 7 stories, staying within that maximum height. The building's approximately 85 feet. So it'd be 2 stories of the historic facade and then 5 stories of new construction above. And then again, here's kind of a better illustration of how that step back is being incorporated for floors 3 to 7, and again, still including that streamlined modern architecture. So the review process here, the item went to the HLRB several times early on to find a design for the new construction that was compatible with the preserved historic facade. The item also intermittently went to the before the design review committee. The HLRB was ultimately supportive of the design and issued a certificate of appropriateness back in July of 2023. And then this item went to the Form-Based Code Advisory Working Group on July 17th. There were questions about the street lighting that would be provided, how the parking was going to be designated, construction and staging plans, and some of the street tree elements that were going to be provided. The applicant held a community meeting on August 22nd, which they can provide a little more information on. And then we anticipate this item going to the county board on November 16th. So that wraps up my portion, and I'll pass it off to the applicant.
Thank you. When you're ready.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Sarah Morisco with Odin Feldman Pittleman here on behalf of the applicant. I think Ms. Sontag might be pulling up my presentation, if that works. And while she does that, I'll introduce, with me, I have John Regan with the Christopher Companies, as well as Angela Kostalecki with Devereaux & Associates Architects, and Dave McElhaney with Urban Engineering, and Chase Allen is participating virtually, who has been working on our landscape details, which have been the topic of much discussion. Thanks, Angela, if we could, or sorry, thanks, Olivia, if we could go to the next slide. So as Ms. Sontag mentioned, this site is in the northeast quadrant of the intersection of South Walter Reed and Columbia Pike, and it is very small. It's under 20,000 square feet, which in and of itself is a challenge. We also do have a facade that's been designated as important on the historic resources inventory. And then we are at the intersection of 2 streets that are prioritized for transit improvements, which have taken some time to work through and coordinate in this process. So next slide, please. As I mentioned, we had a number of considerations that have led to a very lengthy process that allowed us to think through balancing the preservation of the historic facade, those transit improvements, as I mentioned, and then also, of course, the form-based code requirements and how we could meet those to the greatest extent possible. Next slide. We had a robust review by the HALRB and its design review committee. Initially, we were given clear direction on the importance of preserving that facade in the location that it currently is in. And once that direction was provided, we then worked to understand and solve, thankfully, some of the transit improvements, which necessitated incorporating the transit stop along Columbia Pike into a recessed area in that historic facade so that we were able to preserve the facade in the location as was expressed as a clear interest of the HLRB, while also meeting the transit requirements of the county. And then ultimately, we also had a back and forth conversation about how to ensure that the upper stories, floors 3 through 7, were complementing the existing historic facade. And so ultimately, on July 19th, 2023, we did receive approval of a certificate of appropriateness. Next slide. So with that, we were able to proceed with kind of moving forward with the process with an approximately 6,000 square foot retail component on the ground floor, and then 88 multifamily units in floors 3 through 7 above. We also are, as I mentioned, improving the transit stop along Columbia Pike with the integrated transit into the building, adding a transit island and curb extension on South Walter Reed, and then proposing a 3-foot step back of the upper stories from Columbia Pike, a 4-foot step back of the upper stories from Walter Reed, and then the building does include a 2nd floor amenity area as well as a rooftop amenity. And then we do have a 3-story underground garage that will have 88 spaces in that garage. Next slide. To provide a little detail on this bus shelter, highlighted in red or outlined in red is that area where we've been able to recess that building. And on the right-hand side of the slide is a section showing how that recessed area will include benches, and there will be an overhang that would protect folks waiting at that transit stop while still ensuring the clear sidewalk as well as the transit visibility necessary along Columbia Pike for riders and the additional curb height that's been included in the transit plans. Next slide. This is a little bit harder to see on your screen with the colors, but on this slide, the right-hand side is Columbia Pike, the bottom is Walter Reed, and on the left-hand side is the alley. The alley will provide access to our underground garage as well as to the loading area. And then you can see that we have, it's really intended to be teal, but there's some retail areas as well as amenity space on the 1st floor in this 1st floor plan. Next slide. So I just wanted to walk you around the facades of the building in this slide. This is the northern facade or the rear alley facade, where again, you would have access to the loading dock as well as access to the underground garage. Next slide. This is the eastern facade that if you're standing on Columbia Pike, it's the right-hand side of the building, and it's adjacent to what was previously approved and identified as the Elliott. That use permit has been discontinued, and given the uncertainty about potential development of that site, one of the comments that we had heard was the thought that is there some way of improving that facade? Because of the proximity of this facade to the property line, we cannot have openings, but we did propose faux windows to enhance that facade, given the uncertainty of the development of the adjacent site. Next slide. This is a view of the internal facades that are adjacent to, as I mentioned, the 2nd floor courtyard amenity. Next slide. And then this is a view from Columbia Pike. On the slide on the far left-hand side, you can see the transit stop that's been integrated into the building overhang. And then on the right-hand side is that single street tree that we fought hard to accommodate. We were not able to accommodate more because of transit visibility requirements, but we were able to achieve that street tree along Columbia Pike. And then final elevation is on Walter Reed. On the slide, you can see on the left-hand side is the access to the alley. And then you can see the full improvements along Walter Reed. A few notes to elaborate on some of Ms. Sonntag's presentation. There are no existing street trees along this facade, and we are not able to accommodate street trees given both the sidewalk width, the transit stop, and a very intense amount of secure utilities along this facade. We are proposing lighting of that 927 number on this facade. And then I'll also note that the historic facade in the overhangs, there is lighting underneath those overhangs that we are proposing to carry forward with this project. Next slide. This is intending to give a complete picture of some of the tree and landscaping details. So on the right-hand side of the slide in the white rectangle is, as I mentioned, that second floor courtyard where we've been able to accommodate 6 trees in that area. And then the black area is the rooftop amenity space. And then looking at the ground plane, you can see again that street tree that we've accommodated on Columbia Pike. And then along the Walter Reed streetscape on the left-hand side are 3 planters where we are proposing vegetation that will soften this appearance. And even though we cannot have street trees because of the utilities and the transit requirements and the width in that area, we are proposing to soften that with those planters in that location. And then on this image, you can also see, as I mentioned, the length of 9.5-foot curbing on both Columbia Pike as well as the transit island that's being proposed along Walter Reed. And then if we could go to the next slide. Again, one of the things that we worked closely with staff to address was that we were looking at how to accommodate trees on this extremely small site with the historic facade and with the transit improvements. So we're very pleased and really appreciate the work that staff put in to work with us to accommodate 6 trees in that second floor courtyard and then the street tree on Columbia Pike to meet those tree canopy requirements. Next slide. And then just to give you a little bit of a visual, this slide is intended to show you the utilities, both on Columbia Pike and on Walter Reed. You can see the blue and gold and green and red and just the volume of utilities that exist in this area, many of which are very sensitive communications facilities or utilities that it would be hard, if not impossible, to move or relocate. Next slide. I think Ms. Sonntag did a fantastic job of summarizing the modifications, but as I mentioned, we do have the historic facade as well as the transit requirements that have dictated and these kind of requested modifications with staff is supporting, and the advisory working group was generally supportive of as well. And the next slide is just a summary that we did have a community meeting that was well attended with representatives from Penrose, Arlington Heights, Douglas Park, Columbia Heights, and the Columbia Pike Partnership. And we discussed the transit improvements and some of the complexity of accommodating those and their design requirements. And then the interest in accommodating the existing tenants, which we are committed to doing. And there is condition 12, which speaks to working with them.
We think we've gotten a good summary of the.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Okay, any public speakers on this item, Madam Clerk?
No.
No. Okay, any commissions heard this?
No.
HLRB does not, no one from HLRB? I thought I saw someone on.
Did you? Who did you see?
Okay, I may be wrong. Never mind.
Oh.
I think it was staff and it was probably just if we have questions.
okay.
Never mind. Okay, so did Transportation Commission?
Nope.
No? Okay. Commissioner Weir, did the AUG hear this? It sounds like.
Yes, this did go to the AUG, and I think that Ms. Sonntag, correct me if I'm wrong, but other than as described in the report, I think the primary concern was the that the project get built. I think that this came to the odd very shortly after an update about the former Elliott site, and there was a lot of very direct concern and directed concern about that not becoming an issue next door. But the more substantive, the more, I don't want to, let me take that back. The concerns that were more directly related to the comprehensive plan are fairly characterized in the staff report.
Thank you, Commissioner Weir. Are there topics that you feel would benefit the discussion for this evening that we should focus on, or we can sort of do free form if that's more?
I think
appropriate?
A free form moment would be we should have the opportunity to do free form discussion. I do think that transportation and historic preservation do specifically come to mind, and would suggest that they at least be called out separately first.
Okay, thank you. I believe there's also landscaping and biophilia would be an appropriate topic. I'm going to lump those together, even though I recognize they're not quite the same thing. We can add that. I believe that when we'd gone over, the applicant got over time, I believe that was actually what the applicant was starting to get into when I cut them off. Sorry, the clock is the clock. Okay, any other topics that the commission would like to hear? Okay. Going in the order that I wrote things down, why don't we start with transportation? Would any commissioners like to be heard on the topic of Commissioner Weir?
I do have a question about that. I think this is a question for Mr. Gibson. I am looking at a few different pages of the staff report, but I think starting with page 8, could you explain the rationale, or tell me why we're looking at a 16-foot travel lane next to a bike lane and a transit shelter? Those two facts seem at odds with each other to me.
Where we have a narrow sidewalk.
Right.
You'll have to give me one moment. I am just picking this project up with our colleague moving over, so I have to just refamiliarize myself with that question. So if you don't mind queuing up a couple questions, and maybe I can get to those quickly and efficiently.
I'm happy with that, and welcome to the project. Thank you. Come back to transportation.
Moving transportation to the end. Yeah. So we are now talking historic preservation. Commissioner Lantelli.
I'm very happy with the creative solution for the transit stop. However you guys came up with it, I think it's a really, excellent, elegant solution to a narrow sidewalk and the need for a bus shelter there. And we're really big on bus shelters around here right now. So having that in the building, I've never seen that anywhere else. And I give all of you a lot of credit for that. This is a very good looking building. The original building is a very good looking building, and I'm very happy that we're preserving it. What you're doing above it does no violence to that. I think that, again, following what you and HALRB working together on that, coming up with the design you did up there for the upper stories, I think it fits very well with it, and continues to emphasize you want to look at the first 2 stories rather than what's above it because of the coloring and everything. So, I like to keep that going. So I just wanted to give my thanks for everybody who came. I'm just sorry it took so long, from 22 to 24, all those, I mean, obviously it worked because you come up with a really, really good project. But I would love to find a way that we could get this done faster.
Thank you. I will also associate myself with Commissioner Lantelmi's comments. I do think it's an elegant solution with regards to the transit stop. And again, creativity, I think, should be recognized and appreciated. So thank you. Commissioner Sarli.
I too will associate myself with Commissioner Luntelmi's comments. I strongly appreciate, I continue to strongly urge this commission and DES and the community and everyone to make sure we're putting bus shelters everywhere. And I agree, this is just brilliant to see that, you know, in the tight circumstances. So I was really, really happy to see that solution and that shelter being provided to bus riders. I had a quick question, and I'm not sure if this is under transportation, so I'll just go ahead if the Madam Chair will allow me.
To the end.
It's about the alley and the bus, the unloading and loading. Is that
Do you prefer
transportation?
we hold that off on that while you continue to familiarize yourself with the project?
No, sorry, I'm very familiar with the project. I just wanted to make sure I answered the question correctly. Can you?
Let
Can
me
you make your question, and then we can see if it's
perfect. So I noticed that it's angled loading dock. So I'm just making sure that the alley runs all the way through. Are we expecting the trucks or vans to run all the way down, or are they going to back up? I just wanted to know how that's going to work a little bit.
Go ahead.
We are expecting through traffic along the alley, and I'll ask the applicant to respond about how that functions in the near
Sorry,
term.
we're talking about the historic preservation though right now. So I'm not sure that that question is germane to the current topic that we have on. So I am going to hold that until the transportation section.
No problem.
Thank you.
Can I do another
Another historic
architectural?
preservation question?
A little bit. It's architectural.
Try me.
So on the overhang over the alley, that's where I was. I just wondered if we could articulate some sort of a support. Or so the entire building sets back from the historic facade, except for the north end or the alley side. And that just is not sitting well with me. It's sort of the out of tune clarinet, you know, while the rest of the symphony is playing along. And, you know, I know this went through DRC, and I'm not trying to step on the historic preservation design, but there's got to be some sort of articulation, some sort of support, some sort of a visual connection where that overhang connects back to the building. Right now, it just looks like it's a mistake, and it just bumped into something and the whole thing just slid off its pedestal a little bit, you know, so it just feels a little unresolved. And I don't know that you have to answer. I'm just sort of flagging that as I think there are solutions that you can do on the design, articulate some sort of a support system, some sort of a stone corbel or something to create the sense of a support and a connection to the historic structure. Because right now it just looks like a mistake. I literally, the first time I saw it, I'm like, oh, they misaligned there. And I'm like, no, that's actually how it's meant to be. So, you know, I think from a layperson's perspective, that might be the reaction also. I think that's somewhat historic.
That's fine. It's not related to transportation, so continue.
That's it. Thank you.
But you weren't really looking for an answer? Or
no, because
were
this
you?
is something that the design team needs to go back and sort of look at and study and perhaps address it, you know, but thank you.
He gave you homework, but doesn't want an answer. So, okay. And again, we're on the topic of historic preservation. Would anyone else like to be heard on this? Otherwise, I'm going to recognize myself for a moment. I am very pleased that we are able to, as a former member of the HALRB, I'm very pleased that we're in a position where we can preserve the facade in a meaningful way, you know, in situ, you know, so it is, you know, in the same location that it currently exists in. And I think it's an elegant solution with regards to what the, you know, that preservation and balancing that interest with, you know, the necessary development for the community, for the area. Okay, anyone else on historic preservation? Commissioner Sarli.
Quick question. The facade, this was a question on the address of the building. This is a 927 South Walter Reed building, and now we're switching to Columbia Pike. But I noticed that the Walter Reed entrance will remain. Is that going to be confusing? Is that sort of meeting the spirit of the historic preservation? That's a question.
The actual, the address on the tax maps was 2801, but like our entrance that will be to the condominium will be 927 Walter Reed. So I would probably refer to it as 927 Walter Reed.
Perfect. So it'll function as an entrance, and that is the entrance of the building.
Yeah.
Oh,
and
that's
then,
great.
And then the other, to answer your other question, we will look at to add maybe a complementary ban on that bump out area that you were talking about. It looks like it slid. We can add something to that to make it complementary to the existing.
Perfect,
or the
thank you.
Facade.
Okay.
Should I
You
answer?
had another
Okay.
question or no? Okay.
Answer his other question? Oh, we're not doing transportation. Sorry.
We're not doing transportation yet. Sorry. I'm not usually this strict, but it was really throwing me off. Okay, I believe we're now going to talk about landscape, and I'm throwing in biophilia as well with that. Commissioner Bagley.
Can my colleagues fill me in on at least my perceived lack of, is biophilia not included in form-based code? Maybe staff can help with that.
I think it probably would be to the extent that it's covered by a comp plan item, but if it's if there are specific sections of the form-based code that refer to it, that's something that I would look to staff to answer to.
Yeah, we do not currently have a biophilic element in the form-based code. We do have green building requirements. This application is not subject to those, but there are some, I think, elements of biophilic design incorporated with those green building requirements in the form-based code.
Okay. While it's not actually required, I think it would actually soften your building a little bit to maybe between where the historic part is and the other part goes, trying to figure out some greenery that could be put there. Although right now it's sort of a desolate looking building as it is because there is no greenery. It would behoove you, I would think, for those, to make it more marketable and more welcoming looking, to try to put some green in somewhere. And despite whether it's required or not, I definitely think it's a nod in the right direction to at least figure out how to do it somewhere. So thank you.
Anyone else on landscape or biophilia? Yes, Commissioner Bagley.
Will the residents be allowed to have pets? And if so, where do they go?
I'm going to allow that in the biophilia landscape question.
Yes, because
of
it is
where they
landscape.
go.
Yes, where do they go? Is the question.
You're allowed to have pets. I'm sorry, we are. Where they will go, we're gonna have to work on that one. Due to the fact that Walter Reed and Columbia Pike currently, and staff can confirm this, we had difficulties even finding a place there's 3 existing trees currently on Columbia Pike. And even with the bus shelter there, requirements taking those 2 out, 2 of the trees out, they weren't even in compliance because of the massive amount of utilities that are just in both of those sidewalks. And the site is only 19,000 square feet. I hate to say it, but most likely the pet will be going down using some of Arlington County's property down the street.
So on the pet subject, then I think one thing to kind of think with that is it's still very helpful if you do, provide as an amenity or otherwise to your residents, like a station like for bags and like a place to throw away the puppy.
Absolutely.
As a dog owner myself, big fan of those. So I think that's just, something that kind of, goes to making sure it's a clean environment and people are comfortable with that. I don't think anyone here was trying to tell you not to have a pet friendly building. I think we were simply wondering, what the plan was.
Well, and really as a pet lover, just the safety of the animal and where do you go? Columbia Pike is not exactly like a little leisure walk. So, and to keep the neighbors friendly about, why is Fido in my front yard? So, thank you.
Anyone else on landscape or biophilia? Okay. And then affordability. Before we get to transportation, I know everyone's anxious about that. We did want to talk about, and I recognize in your presentation, we, because time was up, we did have to kind of move on. if you could speak to what's happening with the current residents and sort of, because I think that's where I kind of cut you off, and maybe, then if people have questions about affordability or what the kind of makeup of the units is from that perspective, it would be good to hear from that on that too.
The existing tenants are aware that are remaining in the building are aware of this project and have been informed about the project, and we would continue to keep them informed. And we have discussed that we would be willing to keep them in the building as long as possible. The latest lease, if my memory serves, John, is ending in March of 2025. And then again, we would continue to work with tenants to keep them on a month-to-month basis after that. Again, they are aware of the project. And then we are very open to working with them to accommodate them in the new building to the extent that that's possible. And then there are requirements and the conditions with respect to the tenants.
These are commercial.
Correct, commercial.
These are all commercial.
All commercial.
All commercial tenants.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So could you speak to the makeup of affordable units or not? Is it on site? Is it contribution? What if there are
The building is entirely market rate. There's no
Entirely market
requirement
rate.
beyond market.
Did that address your question? You can also ask another question.
Okay, so everything is market rate.
Correct.
Okay. And we're okay with that?
There's no requirement in the commercial form-based code for affordable housing.
And no requirement to do a contribution, so that when you say that there's also no requirement for a.
Yeah, no cash contribution or on-site or off-site unit requirement in the neighborhood's form-based code does have those requirements, but they have not been incorporated into the commercial code.
Gotcha. But there is a ethical requirement that we all face in a county where we are becoming even more so haves and a lot of have-nots. We struggle with housing. We ask every developer who comes in front of us to figure out how to make some more of it affordable to those who are not in the status that I think most of the people in this room are. And it's unfortunate in that location that we can't, just even if it's outside the bounds of what's required or not required, just from an ethical standpoint, we don't have enough affordable housing here. So it is troublesome to me. Also, too, we could use a couple of 3-bedroom units because they're very hard to come by. So again, I know it's not required, but to sleep better at night, to maybe offer 1 or 2 is better than none. I just hope somebody comes and looks at that, because most of us can afford this. There's a lot of people that can't, and they would love to live there. So thank you.
Well, that got the hands going. Commissioner Lentoni?
Yeah, my understanding, the whole theory behind the form-based code up and down the Columbia Pike corridor is it was put in place as a way to preserve the existing affordable housing up and down the corridor, that there would be no net loss of either marks or combined marks and a dedicated affordable. And that was the theory behind the form-based code, is that the new buildings were not required to have an affordable component because it would preserve the existing ones up and down the corridor. And I think it's been pretty much doing that. We can see that, of course, with Barcroft. Those buildings are being preserved and allowing other buildings to be built within that because there's still a lot of open space. So that was the overall theory up and down the corridor, unlike the rest of the county. So that's where the affordable component comes in. It's not any individual project. It's the overall form-based code keeps those in place. And it's been doing that. Right, but up and down, there's also marks along this area too, going all the way toward the Pentagon. Up and down the corridor, was a huge number of those garden apartments and other type of buildings that qualified as marks.
I see you, Commissioner Weir, but Commissioner Steiner's had his hand up for a little bit. So we're gonna go Commissioner Steiner, then Commissioner Weir. Thank you.
Yeah, so I want to associate myself with Commissioner Bagley because I think those points are really valid. I think the diversity in the types of housing we have in terms of the size, that's something I've been hammering on for months. I think those 3 bedrooms, family size units are important. And then I think, the concept of affordable housing too, it's just because it isn't required doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. You're buying into this community. And it's important that we put the values of this community, again, even if it's not written down or required, we put the values of this community, which is one of those values is to promote affordable housing, whether it's just a contribution or on-site units. If you're buying into this community, it's important that you embody those values as well.
Thank you, Commissioner Steiner. Commissioner Weir?
Just for the benefit of the record of the discourse, while I don't particularly disagree with any point that has been made, especially as to the general importance of affordable housing, I would just ask people to bear in mind that there once was an idea, and it still is an option, but there once was an idea that where affordable housing would be delivered as part of new construction along Columbia Pike was underneath the site plan option, and giving applicants a diversity of options and alternatives in density that they want to construct, with the hope that that there would be projects where site plan would pencil, and in those projects we would be looking at things like affordable housing contributions, whereas the idea is that a use permit approval process or entitlement process is for projects that don't trigger the need for site plan mitigation. One strategy for which has included either contributions to the Affordable Housing Investment Fund or delivery of on-site affordable housing units. And so, while I do agree with the sentiment, and maybe I hope my colleagues will forgive me if I'm being pedantic, but I think it's important for us to also remember that that this is a use permit, and use permits don't, we can ask for affordable housing, and I think it's appropriate to do so, but that requirement triggers in higher levels of density than what we're seeing along Columbia Pike. And if we want to have, I could talk longer about why we're not seeing that, but that would probably be an appropriate conversation for not on the dais.
You want to? Nope. Okay, so I think that what I'm hearing is that there may be a conversation here with regards to the form-based code for Columbia Pike, and what maybe this is not that I don't know. Well, I don't know if I'm allowed to suggest topics for the OG to consider, but perhaps this is something that should be taken up again in that sort of context, as opposed to right now in the context of an applicant who has followed the form-based code as it exists for the purposes of further conversation.
And the OG has identified the need to further discuss whether or not there should be an affordable housing element to the commercial form-based code, and staff is aware that that conversation has happened. It's something that would have to work its way into the work plan, and that's also something that we're going to be in a position to give feedback on at some point in the relatively near future, I imagine.
Great, so problem solved. No, I say that in jest. I mean, I'm glad that it's been recognized. I'm glad there are conversations coming forth, and it does, like many other things, does need to make its way into the work plan, because lots of things are wanted in the work plan. Okay. Hey, we're up to transportation now. Would you like Commissioner Weir to repeat his question, or you want to just hit the ground running?
16 feet, what's up with that?
There you go.
We've extensively coordinated this project and the county's South Walter Reed Complete Streets project. And with the county's project, it's going to reposition all of the multimodal facilities, and the 16-foot lane that's shown here assumes that the county's project comes in behind that and narrows the lanes and provides additional protected bike facilities. This site is showing the bus stop. So there's a whole suite of multimodal improvements coming together from a private partner, public and private side.
what I think I'm hearing you saying is another thing that I think I hear you saying is that the 16-foot travel lane is there because the applicant is being asked to make improvements to this side of the street, and that the travel lanes markings just aren't going to match up neatly with the center line of the street, right? And so we're not going to be looking at a 16-foot travel lane in perpetuity.
Correct.
Okay.
It's an interim condition.
Correct.
Thank you.
And
Thank you,
it's
Commissioner, for telling me.
unlikely that we'll see that sort of paper condition actually built.
A paper, okay, that's all very helpful. Thank you, Mr. Gibson.
Commissioner Sarley, I believe you had a transportation-related question regarding an alley.
Angled loading bay and alley, what's up with that?
There's an existing 15-foot alley on the project that goes all the way to the east and connects through a number of properties. That gets expanded per the plan, and then that will connect in with a new Cleveland Street that projects north, providing circulation from the alley back out to Columbia Pike bidirectionally.
So I guess the next property over knows that that's part of the plan and that needs to stay in place, and that somehow it comes out and then it connects to Columbia Pike.
Correct.
And how does that impact? I guess we don't need to discuss that now, but I guess I know that the Penrose Square is supposed to extend into the CVS parking lot, and so I guess we'll figure that out at a later date.
So the combination, so that project will deliver an expanded Penrose Square, and adjacent to that, a new Cleveland Street, and that Cleveland Street will connect at its north end to this alley.
Okay, so we are fully expecting that any loading truck will come in, we'll back up, and then we'll go out.
Correct.
Via this new route. Okay.
And there's existing, what do they call it? Egress easements for the site that would continue to permit that without the delivery of the form-based code improvements.
Perfect. Thank you.
Commissioner Weir, I believe, had another transportation-related question, and then we'll go to Commissioner Bagley.
Yeah, I'm looking at page 16 of the staff report, and in figure 13, there is a post-painted bike lane buffer. I am certainly grateful to see a buffer between the bike lane and the vehicular travel lane. I want to just note that I really hope that there comes a point where we're looking at some kind of facility separating the cyclists and the drivers that is more permanent than paint and knock down bollards. I mean, I don't want to say, I don't know the name for the kind of somewhat larger concrete curb that we see in a lot of protected bike lanes in the district. It looks like, the one that I have in mind, that, it's about 8 inches tall and slightly tapered on the sides. But something that advertises to cyclists, delivery to driver, motorists, delivery vehicles, would-be quick parkers. I just have to do one thing, drivers, with that this is not a travel lane and stay out, would be great. Thank you.
So our standards do include both the taller posts and the smaller concrete. Some would liken them to wheel stops, but they're mini islands of sorts.
So when it says painted bike lane buffer, that I should read that to include
yes,
facilities in beyond that are more hardened than just knockdown bollards.
Typically, yes.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that clarification. Thank you.
And I hope you will get to see them very soon in front of this building at Clarendon and Wilson with a new delivery there.
Indeed, yep. Indeed, thank you.
Potentially, so you said something interesting there that I want to kind of pull the thread on a teensy bit. You said most likely, I think was your phrasing. What would make it not the case?
I think that was my use of A. I don't want to say the wrong thing because there's always a possibility. Our
Okay.
standards typically include the hardened.
The
Curbstone.
expectation is the hardened element to protect the bike lane unless there is some other mitigating circumstance that would require a deviation from that, and we would be discussing what that deviation would be.
That is part of our standard protected bike lane
Okay.
design.
That was an incredibly lawyerly answer. Props. Okay. Transportation. Oh, Commissioner Bagley. Sorry, I already called on you.
No worries. This is for the applicant. So 88 units and 88 parking spaces. Is there guest parking? And if so, where? And if the commercial tenants come back, is there dedicated retail parking? And if so, where?
Because the site's under 20,000 square feet, the parking requirement is 0 spaces. We are providing 88 spaces for the residents and no spaces beyond that, which again is significant given that our requirement is actually 0 spaces.
Given those requirements, though, what do you tell somebody when they have guests? Just you're on your own on the street? Is that, I mean, will there be some educational or suggested or guidance given to that? I just think some communication, thinking out strategically, communication, make you a better neighbor, communication solves a whole bunch of stuff. So just a suggestion.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have made it through our particular topics that were identified. So we've talked about transportation, historic preservation, landscape biophilia, affordability. So at this juncture, I would be interested in any other generalized topics that have not yet been addressed, or moving to a motion, or both. Motion. Okay. Since this went to Og, Commissioner Weir, do you have a motion?
I move,
Please.
I move that I move that the Planning Commission recommend that the county board approve the subject use permit for the development of 88 multifamily dwelling units and ground floor retail uses with modifications for the required building lines and streetscape details, and approval of 1 bonus story as allowed to incorporate the preserved historic facades, subject to the conditions of the staff report.
Second.
Thank you. Commissioner Sarley, was that with the second? Okay. Thank you. Any further discussion with regards to the motion or otherwise? Okay. Then I think we will move to a vote. Commissioner Bagley.
Aye.
Commissioner Weir.
Aye.
Commissioner Lantomi.
Aye.
Commissioner Robertson.
Aye.
Commissioner Sarley.
Aye.
Commissioner Steiner.
Aye.
I note that Commissioner Patel has joined us. Commissioner Patel, do you wish to vote on this motion?
No, I don't think I can, since I've missed the discussion. So I'll abstain.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Steinberger, aye. So the motion passes 7-0 with 1 abstention. Thank you very much to staff and the applicant. We appreciate everyone's time this evening.
I should agree. Thank you to the staff.
We have a reshuffling moment, and then I believe that Madam Clerk will call the 4th item. Thank you.
Our final item for this evening is a request to adopt items related to the Commercial Market Resiliency Initiative, CMRI, transformation of commercial office buildings. We have Jill Hunger and Mark McCulley to present this item.
Okay. Good evening, all. Thank you, Chair Steinberger, members of the commission. We are here tonight to present for your consideration two separate items and a third that Jill will discuss as well regarding the fees associated with some of these zoning. No, we'll mention it. We'll reference it, not for your consideration. But this is around the transformation of office buildings in Arlington County. Next slide. So the three steps that we looked at relative to process change for this broader topic is, one is a broad, what we think is pretty holistic county board policy that looks at a number of different tools that look to address office supply. And that includes justifying the impact of what we're seeing in the commercial markets and why county action is so important. Two, looking at adaptive reuse, or what some communities call conversions, as a first step, but not only step, but first step in this policy implementation. And then other policy tools for further consideration in 25 and beyond, in 2025 and beyond, looking at repositioning, redevelopment, and potentially incentives or partnerships. The second is also in front of the county board and you tonight in November is zoning ordinance amendment, which looks to implement a process change for adaptive reuse, setting criteria and limitations, looking at things like affordability requirements, as well as methods for achieving minimal increases in density relative to specific actions to improve the current status of the building that's going to be adaptively reused. And then third, which is not a legislative action, but is important to the overall process, is our administrative regulations. And those set and form what are the submittal checklists, what do developers or landlords or owners have to submit to the county for this new process, what is the elements of the process, and we have some discussion points with you about the planning commission's role in that, as well as timing, and then standard conditions and development standards and development site standards through which we review applications. And we expect to get those done by the end of this year. So the policy, as I said, looks at a number of these things. Obviously, the first several chapters looking at the background of the state of the commercial market and the impacts of the declining office sector. We'll highlight some of those tonight, but in the interest of time, can respond to questions as well. What is the policy response from a holistic standpoint of looking at how we create a bold and public policy and regulatory intervention to mitigate those impacts, to establish as a public priority the repurposing of obsolete office space, and public priority, as we'll discuss throughout this presentation, is important because it really puts in standing, and particularly in the zoning ordinance, and standing with other ways that the board can modify things such as affordable housing or green building or civic facilities, transportation, other elements that are core principal elements. And then obviously this is a focus on transforming the supply of existing obsolete office buildings. And again, with the first focus on Chapter 5, which is the regulatory framework for adaptive reuse, and then Chapter 6, which introduced a number of different other tools for further consideration. So what is the state of the office market? Well, there's real challenges we're facing. We often talk in terms of market challenges as cyclical or structural. Cyclical is where there's ebb and flow, supply and demand, there's constant correction, constant market reassessing of sort of the balance. These are a lot more structural, both on the demand side, as we all know, even before the pandemic, but certainly since the pandemic, a very different view on how people work and where they work, and also very structural on the supply side, meaning we have an aging presence of older, obsolete, obsolete or soon to be obsolete office buildings that really have reached the end of their useful life and really are not competitive as office properties anymore. So even in the best demand environment, these are still challenging buildings to deal with, and then have a massive drain on our fiscal revenues and our placemaking. And again, we don't see this as a cycle. We'll grow out of this, or we'll demand ourselves out of this. This is really a look at supply, both in terms of near term as well as midterm and long term challenges. So we certainly think that the challenges are still ahead of us. We've felt them. We continue to feel them, but certainly things like assessments, even lagging some of our new realities, is always a sober tone, and an action in and of itself would be really an acceleration of market distress as these buildings sort of piled up. And then lastly, as we've talked about in various iterations, much of the focus of the Commercial Market Resiliency Initiative is on how we address some of these challenges, but we often look in terms of first of stabilization. And then, how do we let the market sort of settle? And then how do we then incrementally grow that weakness into a strength once again? And so the need for the worst may be over yet is really looking at both the short of market corrections and assessments of the lagging indicator, medium, where we still believe we'll be in this period of correction for several years, not more, as we continue to see office properties trade at historically low values. And at the long term, the obsolete chronically vacant buildings will not be transformed overnight, and they're not going to transform by themselves. And we've all seen cities, not that Arlington's there, but we always look as a lesson learned of other cities where you have these significant supplies of obsolete buildings, and they really become sort of detrimental to the quality of life of the people living there. And why are we overtaking this change? Well, there is a path forward for adaptive reuse currently in the ordinance. You go through a major site plan amendment. And that's really what we're trying to do, is streamline that process to make the change in these buildings relative to the context of what the impact of the change is, where the building's essentially staying the same, and reducing the process, not by cutting out steps that are necessary, but more of really reflecting that these buildings are less complicated than new construction. They have less moving parts. They're existing structures. And really having that review time and that review timeline sort of reflect that. And so we understand that there are sector plans which have long-term visions for sites, and we need to reflect that and understand that as we discuss this. We don't think adaptive reuse sort of ignores a sector plan. We think a sector plan is a long-term vision to begin with, but we do think that there's a healthy discussion to be had. And then probably the big one from just in terms of how we actually look at these and sort of review these. Most of our site plans, as you see from your spot on the dais, have a lot of conditions, a lot of interwoven conditions, and unpacking that is sometimes part of the problem. Someone says, why don't you just make it by right? It already is technically by right to go from like office to residential in most of our districts. It's the conditions that need to be worked on and need to be streamlined that sort of is the work. And under the current process, that often takes probably too long relative to the context of change, as I said. So, next slide. So again, what is the policy from overarching? It's really looking at sort of saying when we face these challenges, how do we look at streamlining the process to shorten review time and limit upfront costs, including looking at new clear processes, how we look at checklists or submittal requirements, the focus of staff review and concise engagement, what are the standards that we're applying to the review, and how flexible are they? And then how do we allow for modifications? Because we'll go through this in a second again, but just it's important to repeat. We also don't want just buildings that change use. We want buildings that make investments. Investments are made that are better buildings after this process than when they started. And many of these buildings older have a lot of work to do to become better buildings. So again, public priority is one of the things that we want everyone to take away from this. This is a significant, we believe, potential statement by the board of the importance of this issue to them and to the community, that there's a sense of urgency, that the reason why we're moving quickly in some of these things is because there is that urgency, that these products do have different economics. So they're not asking for a lot of density that we can value into community benefits. There's a different market risk and capital sourcing process going through for conversions because not every capital source sees them as easy to figure out. There are trade-offs of policies and community benefits really with a small c capital, a small c, small b, in terms of just things we typically expect out of new construction. We may need to trade off, and we'll go into that in a second. And then again, this highlight of this is going to be improving the existing condition, and the existing condition could last for a long time. This isn't a trade-off between new redevelopment and a conversion or adaptive reuse. It's often a trade-off between potentially new development, but the building staying around for a while, and then what do we do with it in the interim? And so there is potential for things like public realm improvements and such. So this new streamlined process, and Jill will go over the zoning aspect of this, but it is a new process in the zoning ordinance. We do look to get a streamlined process of 120 to 150 days as the goal, where our major site plan amendments typically take maybe double that or more. We are working with, looking overall at minor, major administrative definitions, but this is a new process in the ordinance, so it doesn't confuse. It's not trying to fit its way into one. It's a new process that will be in the ordinance to apply for. It will still end with county board consideration. We talked a lot early in the process about studying ways to do an administrative pathway, both from a transparency standpoint, from a public good standpoint, and from a legal standpoint. We realize that this ultimately still requires a county board hearing. So the question we'll ask you later is the role of the PC, but certainly it still is a public process. It's not a behind the scenes bureaucratic process or administrative process, although there may be potential changes to engagement approach. And then the criteria and limitations, we meant to be flexible but focused. We want to set guardrails. So we are only considering, as of right now in this ordinance change, site plan projects that have a principal use of office. That doesn't mean that may not change. We are not looking at by right, for instance, today, because the complexity of that issue was raised early in the process of probably needs to be disassociated from the site plan first to get the site plan. It doesn't mean it's not of interest and not important to those places that have more by right office buildings or commercial buildings. And so we are looking at that as a next step. And then you'll see changes to major community benefits not considered in this new process. So if a site plan already had provided a major community benefit, such as a park, we're not saying this is a process through which the developer can come in and say, I want to adaptively use the building and I want to get rid of that park and change it into something else. That would be a separate process that would have a more thorough community engagement process around it. So we've talked about the policy and process changes. What are the benefits of the county? Well, the benefits of the county is where we're aligned with the market, quite frankly, and that the market likes these because it gets them to market quicker, makes more decisive timelines in terms of where they can get their capital and how quickly they can hit the market when they see a demand. We also benefit from that as a county because we read that as assets coming back to the tax rolls quicker, more dynamic activity in our neighborhoods quicker. A project for an adaptive reuse, for instance, may take 16 to 18 to 20 months of construction from start to finish. Whereas new construction, where you are literally digging a new hole and building back up from that 3 or 4 stories below ground, is 36 to 40 months, with a lot of disruption, as we know, in our neighborhoods relative to that major construction. So this is a much more neighborhood-friendly level of construction, and we think has a more immediate impact, which is a huge benefit to the county. And in terms of expected scale, so one of the things that I think a lot of people in this discussion sort of regionally and nationally have had over the past several years, if not more, is a number of different conversations about how common are these going to be and how viable are they. We do have two, what we call one adaptive reuse project, one that is a little bit different, that more is what we call an adaptive reuse plus in Crystal City. One is the old We Work, We Live building, which has been changed many times, its name, but was an office building converted into residential with some commercial co-working space above it. And then 220 20th, which took down and it was an old BRAC building, took down the facade and then built 6 stories above it. I want to be clear, that's not currently defined as adaptive reuse in our work, but it is a next step to look at that process, which will happen next year. But those processes were challenging. They were really without precursors or precedents. It was difficult getting them through the process because of that. And we really wanted to streamline that. But still, we think there's probably 10 or 12 of these in the county that are realistic because of some of the constraints. There's physical constraints, there's economic constraints, there's the constraints of who's in the building today, who's leaving, when are they leaving, setting it up, not unlike redevelopment. And then what is the market to absorb those alternative uses, and what do those alternative uses look like? Because we can talk about floor plate inefficiency, for instance, and that has 2 factors. Sometimes it just completely discourages a look at conversion, but often it then can provide different and unique units, sometimes to the gain of the owner, sometimes to the negative impact on the marketability of those units. So there's a lot to figure in here. But we do think while this say like 8 to 10 or 12, whatever number you want to pick, because we're making informed guesses in terms of what types of buildings we'll be seeing to go through this. That may sound like a small number, but when you look at it in terms of removing office space, that may mean 1.5 million, 2 million, 2.5, 3 million square feet of office space off the market. We're currently 43 million square feet of office outside of the government-owned space. So it's a significant percentage of our market that would be removed from inventory, which would be good because it would push demand to other parts of our market that are better performing. And I mentioned this in terms of why are we looking at modifications. One is because while Jill will talk about, we do not have, this is not about new stories or new building additions, significant building additions, but we want to allow things like ground floor bump outs or better facades in this streamlined process, because we do think that alongside site plan standards, we want high quality buildings coming out of this. So we want these to be interim buildings in the sense that many of them are in areas where redevelopment ultimately is believed to be the ultimate vision. But that while they're here, they should be high performing. They should address the ground plane appropriately. They should be quality buildings where people can enjoy either living or visiting or whatever they're going to do in that building relative to its alternative use of office. So that's an important part of why modifications, we want to streamline that and make it easier and relatively low cost to allow those improvements in ingenuity in building design. And we do obviously want to reflect the relationship to existing policies and guidelines, things like sector plans, which may call out a site for a particular use, and this may be in conflict to that. We already have a process, administrative process that interacts with the community review process, but we really want to have that a transparent discussion, but really want to allow this to think about maybe differently than some sector plans that are a bit older did about use as the world changed around us. As well as things like some buildings are in the way of things like parks or streets. And that's a legitimate conversation to have. But again, we don't see redevelopment as a fait accompli for some of these buildings in the near term. And so that condition would likely persist anyways. We did have a good discussion with our housing commission and affordable housing. I think there was a general understanding and agreement that these are the types of projects that are not best suited for affordable housing, given the economics. We made sure they did not preclude it if other resources come to bear, but they are different projects than, say, ground up development that's earning a lot of density. And they were very much, I think, interested and happy to talk with you all further about it, but about how these do typically sort of deliver different types of units, some larger units, some units that have different live workspaces, because you're trying to fit the units into a office floor plate. Sometimes space isn't nearly as constraint as is in a new building where you're really trying to value engineer that building down. So we've seen some very interesting units, larger units, as I said, and a lot of live work type units that we think will be a benefit to our housing and create a diversity of housing stock that is still very important to our housing discussion. We did have a discussion with our commission on energy and looking at green building. We once again got, I think, general support and I think strong understanding that the standards of new construction may not always apply here. And there's some very physical reasons, not just economic. Drilling into an existing building and finding a place to put different utilities is challenging, sometimes not possible, depending on how the building was constructed. And so there needs to be a trade-off of that. But once again, we will be seeking sort of standards that we think progress from existing to a new life of a building, much better green building. And then we will be obviously not changing, but applying already existing commercial and residential parking, which for the most part, if you're taking an older office building that was parked under a previous site plan, say in the 60s, 70s, or 80s, or 90s, and you convert it to an alternative use like hotel or residential, you're going to have a significant amount of unrequired parking that's already built. And so one of the things we've talked about is how you may use that parking to gross floor area for other uses other than parking. And then finally, I mentioned this up front, but we don't want to really bury the lead, although we're very excited about adaptive reuse and getting that forward as an actual process. We are equally excited about, after a short break, maybe in December, getting back to it in 2025 on what's in front of us next in terms of this policy, looking at all measures of how we look at obsolete office space repurposing, and finding ways to really streamline those processes as much as possible and as much as appropriate. And then finally, you'll see financial incentives and public-private partnerships. I want to make it clear that when we went into this and still today, regulatory tweaking, amendment, reform, any number of those spectrums was clearly the priority. We think we save the development community a lot of time and money by doing that, and doesn't cost the county anything other than the consideration of providing those different processes. A financial incentive is something we've been asked to look at by different commissions and by different stakeholder groups. We will be looking at it, but it is not the priority, and it's not something that is affecting the November action, just to make that clear.
Sorry, I just want to clarify, because I'm recognizing the pace, and I do want to make sure I know there's a fulsome discussion that the panel, that the commissioners would like to have.
Yeah.
What is your timing on the presentation, and can we maybe
Yes.
skip some slides?
Jill will be next.
Huh?
Yes, I will go quickly, and we do not have 42 slides.
Okay,
in the
I wanted to
presentation.
clarify that,
Lot-
because
a
I
lot-
saw the number and that.
Back pocket
A
slides.
lot of backup.
Okay, how many slides do you have?
5 or 6 left.
5 or 6 more? Okay, that's fine. I just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Again, Jill Hunger with CPHD, just wanted to go over the proposed amendment to the Arlington County zoning ordinance. Be pretty quick about this. This is sort of just the proposed amendments is really to implement the proposed policy. So we really wanted to lay the sort of the table, or set the table with the policy. So walking through the zoning ordinance amendment is pretty straightforward. In it, we're establishing a new category of site plan amendments, the adaptive reuse amendment, and with that, having criteria, findings, and standards. I think part of the request to advertise that went to the county board did have a definition as part of the request to advertise, but what we're doing is, and again, analogous to other amendment categories, our major amendment category and our minor amendment category, a separate definition is not recommended or required. So what does this proposed amendment to the zoning ordinance do? Again, it reflects the proposed policy, and most importantly is that it's a public priority. It is a new site plan amendment process. It clarifies that adaptive reuse amendments are similar to rehabilitation or renovation of development, which ties into our affordable housing requirements. As Mark had pointed out, we're establishing criteria and/or guardrails in that these are site planned office buildings that are changing a significant percentage of existing office use to another office use. We're establishing some limitations of what is and is not. Again, going back to the applicability of affordable dwelling unit requirements, as sort of a clarifying it's similar to rehabilitation or renovation, and that it is a public priority. And finally, providing methods, criteria, and findings for earning specific types of density and one element of height. So just real quickly, these are lines 60 through 89 of the zoning ordinance amendment draft zoning ordinance amendment that you should have received. What it qualifies for an adaptive reuse amendment and what does not qualify. There is one change, and this is stemming from conversation with both LRPC and SoCo and internal conversation, that originally we had that the building has been occupied for at least 5 years. We were kind of struggling with that. I think some of our commissioners, questioned that, and rather we're just saying that the principal use of the existing building is at least 50% office. So really setting forth how this qualifies and then how it does not qualify. So as Mark pointed out, there's no increase to the existing roof line height except for rooftop amenity space. So we're not adding additional stories to the we're not increasing the GFA with additions that are greater than 2 stories above finished grade. So this does accommodate the bump outs. There's no vacation or amendments to existing public easements, no change to the previously conditioned affordable housing, community facilities, sustainable design or other public priorities. And as Mark had pointed out, no reduction of commitments required by other previous board approvals. So we mentioned the density allowances and site plan standards. What we've established is a provision for the county board to modify its regulations to allow for additional density and, in one instance, additional height. So it's allowing for density above the zoning district. In some of our zoning districts, if it was approved as an office, it was an FAR. If it goes to residential, it is a units per acre. And we don't want there to be any conflict or mathematical challenges and gymnastics associated with doing that conversion. The building is built and we want it to be able to have the number of residential units that is appropriate for that, allowing for ground floor bump outs, including previously excluded square footage. So this could be elevator shafts that are no longer needed and can be converted into a space to collect recyclables per floor. Mezzanine space, any balconies and or terraces that may have been existing for the office that are enclosed. Again, with rooftops, allowing for addition of amenity space. So this could also be extending or expanding the penthouse itself. Facade replacement and allowing and accommodating additional density associated with different types of facades. And then the conversion of unused parking or not required parking any longer. Again, all of these provisions allowing for additional density. There are a couple of findings that the county board would have to do is that it's consistent with the change of the use. It reflects the overall reinvestment in the building, and all in all, it enhances our public realm. All of these other elements that are listed here would all be considered as part of the proposal. So in a nutshell, we have the policy, we have the zoning ordinance amendment, and how we operate all of this is through administrative regulations and guidelines. So establishing new administrative regulations, I think many of you are familiar with the admin regs 4.1. This would be a new admin reg. It includes submittals checklist, the process engagement, which we'll get back to, the timing, the site and building standards, and standard site plan conditions. Again, in doing this, it doesn't require the county board approval, but we recognize it's key to this implementation of both the policy and the zoning ordinance amendment. So we're attempting to have this all in place by the end of the year or early next year. So as I mentioned, and Mark mentioned, is about the streamlined engagement and review process, and really about the role of the Planning Commission and its subcommittees. I'll come back to this slide if you want it, but really the proposal for discussion purposes is the developer would provide a recorded presentation, an online comment portal, no LRPC meetings would be required, potentially no SPRC required unless it's deemed necessary. And I think that's the conversation here. What do we mean? How is it deemed necessary? No other advisory commissions, and then a PC and a county board hearing. Just wanted to highlight some of the community engagement that we have done. We've had 2 lunch and learn, these virtual information sessions, gone to the county board for the request to advertise. The commission, the planning commission was able to accommodate it both in the long range planning committee as well as a joint committee of the LRPC and the zoning committee, ZOCO. We've gone to the Economic Development Commission, the Housing Commission, the Housing Committee of the Arlington Civic Federation, and the Climate Change, Energy, and Environmental Commission. And we also, and not on here, apologies, the Transportation Commission. So our recommendation this evening is adopting the following elements related to the Commercial Market Resiliency Initiative, CMRI, transformation of commercial office buildings. There's a resolution for the policy as well as the ordinance for the zoning, an ordinance to amend, reenact, and recodify the zoning ordinance. What's not included for the Planning Commission, but I'll let you know, is we are requesting that the county board authorize the advertisement of new fee specific to adaptive reuse amendment. We're not trying to shoehorn it into another thing, and we've confirmed that we actually need to set up a new fee associated with that. So we have to go to our county board to request advertisement, and we'll be coming back to you in December for action. And that is it.
Thank you very much. Any public speakers, Madam Clerk?
Mr. Musso,
Thank you.
thank you for patiently waiting.
Good evening, members of the Planning Commission. I'm John Musso, Government Affairs Manager at the Arlington Chamber of Commerce. On behalf of the Arlington Chamber, I would like to strongly urge all of you to please vote to recommend that the County Board adopts the County Board policy on transforming office buildings and the related zoning amendments. Arlington is currently facing a 23.7% commercial office vacancy rate, and per a Arlington Economic Development study, a office building that only has 50% of occupancy only generates 58% of the tax revenue that a fully occupied building could carry, which has tremendous downstream effects on the ability for the county to fund the type of high quality public services that so much of our community value, including schools, parks, human services, public. Sorry about that. Okay. But just to reiterate, we please urge you to recommend the adoption of this yeah. There you go. Okay, hopefully that's last a bit. We commend the county for considering this policy, for promoting this, and this is precisely the kind of bold public policy we'd like to see from the county, from the Chamber's perspective. So we please urge you all to recommend the adoption for the county board. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you. And you still didn't use all of your time, but there. That was the only public speaker? Okay. So I understand this was heard by several of our subcommittees. So I'd like to hear from LRPC first, and then ZOCO, and then Transportation. Is anyone here to speak for LRPC?
Yes, we did. Yes.
Oh my God. We had a lot of discussion on this. And a lot of it is really reflected in the staff report. Overall, I think it was a lot of questions about how it was going to work. But overall, we were sympathetic with the need for this and understood the need for it and support it going forward. That pretty much is the report. Actually, while I'm here, I could also do transportation because we heard about this also at the same time. One question does revolve around affordable housing, and we had a lot of explanations on how affordable housing fits with this proposal. There was a lot of confusion about that in the Transportation Commission, even though it's not really transportation oriented, was talking about that. We did talk about parking, how that works. We talked about density, and how additional density can be teased out of an existing building that otherwise would not allow it by doing this conversion. That was another topic we went into. I'm pretty those are, I think, really the big topics we really were looking at when we went through this. And getting back to Transportation Commission, we did vote unanimously to recommend approval of this. And then LRPC, of course, obviously moved on to descended on to here. So that's the report.
Thank you. Anything from ZOCO to add?
Yeah, so I'll begin by apologizing to Commissioner Lentelme. Actually, it was Commissioner Berkey that chaired that, but Commissioner Lentelme was there and he did a great report.
Great report, Commissioner Lentelme. Didn't even realize you chaired.
I really appreciate that, and I do apologize. No, exactly as Commissioner Lentelme mentioned, there's general support for this. We didn't have any issues with it other than trying to wrap our heads around it. I think there's several moving parts, and trying to help. Staff was solicitous about sort of how we can help them expedite the process and still maintain that public element. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so topics wise, a couple of things that I'm hearing, and I would like to hear, other topics that we might want to kind of discuss for the focus of our conversation. Parking and sort of some of the reuse elements with the garages and other such that we touched on, the affordable housing element, other specific topics that folks would like to kind of add to that list. Commissioner Ware?
Site plan mitigation conditions and calculation generally.
Yeah. Anything else as a specific topic? Just general, yeah, definitely given. Okay. Are we allowed to keep talking? We don't have a sixth person out here right now. Is that okay? Okay, thank you. Sorry, quorum question. Okay, moving over to parking and some of the reuse elements with that. Yes, Commissioner Tommy.
I raised this at TC. And I actually a related question to what I raised at TC, which is one is, can we get down to just no parking minimum? It simplifies things. We already have that in the smaller sites under the form-based code, so we have experience with it. As acknowledged, the buildings that will be coming up under this probably are way overparked anyway. So why do we even have to have a parking minimum in place? We could just say, basically have that. What do you think is going to work here for what you're proposing to do, and leave it at that and let the market decide on that. Following up on that, I have a question. Will we be requiring a new transportation analysis as part of this? Because I was looking under the report, and on page 8, we're saying transportation, parking, and loading guidance shall utilize existing policies and precedents for site plan reviews with more specific review guidelines and standard site plan conditions provided in the administrative regulations. Okay, does that mean we're still going to be requiring transportation analysis for each of these projects?
A little bit of the answer is that we're still sort of putting a fine point on that with our transportation staff.
Okay, good. Since you're still working on it, then here's what I recommend. Don't require one, period. It seems like it would be a total waste of both money and especially time. And if you can drop that, it's going to be a tremendous incentive to go ahead and do this. And the reason for that is, since we're going from office use to residential use, it seems to be almost inconceivable that there'd be more traffic coming out of that building than the existing use. Given that we know it's going to drop, that means there's going to be less of an effect on the community. So why do we need a transportation analysis for something that we just know is going to happen? Transportation analyses are expensive. They are time consuming. And if we don't need it because we know what the result is anyway, and that there is no negative effect by this conversion, let's just totally drop that from the regulations for the conversions. That's my recommendation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else on parking? Commissioner Sarli, then Commissioner Bagley.
I'll be super quick. I just want to associate myself with Commissioner Lantelmi's suggestion.
Okay, that was quick. Commissioner Bagley.
This was an ask 1,000 years ago as a civic association president in an arena where there was a tremendous amount of commercial parking, but not enough spaces for neighbors, so to speak. And I was told at that time, gosh, I don't know how many years ago this was, it's so difficult. There's so many owners and blah, blah, blah. But if we are successful in some of this reuse of space, then there would be neighbors, I know in my corridor of Virginia Square and Ballston, that overflow parking or, even renting parking spaces for the month, whatever. I think it's something that, could provide somebody some revenue and some incentive. So I'm going to put it back out there after, dust it off my shelf and put it back out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else on parking? Okay. Moving to affordable housing. Any commissioner? Yes, Commissioner Bagley.
So it's just a little distressing to me to see slide 16 where it says, affordable housing things wouldn't be considered as much. So it's just distressing to me. Along those same lines, and again, as somebody who's in residential real estate, getting away from what we have done as conventional apartments or whatever, what we've been told over the years sometimes in some of these office buildings that the conversions wouldn't be possible because of no kitchens, bathrooms, blah, blah, blah. Maybe we get away from, become a trendsetter. Maybe other cities have already done this. I don't know. But maybe coming up with communal style living where it's going to be less expensive anyway. There's a shared kitchen, there's shared bathrooms, whatever. But it gets more people a chance to be into something, and maybe we even figure out how to make it somewhat where you actually make it co-op based and they own a portion of it. So I think there's room for a lot more creativity here. You definitely have made major inroads into this. But I would say the creativity here so that we don't lose the affordable housing, but let's maybe look at creative things with that. Thank you.
Thank you. I will associate myself with Commissioner Bagley's comments in that regard. Anyone else wishing to be heard on the affordable housing element? Okay.
I was just going to ask staff for clarification on the affordable housing, how exactly that works, because we're envisioning office buildings being converted to residential, right? So we're not losing any affordable housing, or we don't envision losing. Is that correct?
That is correct. The use that's being converted is office, so that obviously doesn't have any on-site affordable housing associated with it.
So we're just not requiring that in these converted units that there is going to be an affordable element on the at least 50% or more of the building.
That's correct.
Okay.
Because the building already exists. They may, depending on the age of the building, may have already contributed at some point in time to affordable housing, all dependent on the conditions and the time, the age of the building. And yes, you're correct. It's being converted to residential or another use like hospitality, for example.
And the housing contribution would have been a cash contribution, obviously, because we couldn't have done it on site.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Weir, same topic or your new topic? Same topic. Okay, Commissioner Weir.
I'm going to get to some of this again when we get to conditions more generally, but I just want to note that I do take issue with the idea that site plan mitigation conditions aren't necessary because the building already exists. The time horizon for a lot of these site plan mitigations, especially when it comes to affordable housing being 60 years, is tied to that because that is the expected lifespan of the building, that the building would then be redeveloped and new site plan conditions would be applied, right? We're not doing 30-year conditions or 60-year conditions for new buildings that we expect to last 100 years. And if we are, it's because we're making a value statement about, we're making an economic statement and a value statement about what the condition of the building is going to be in 60 years. So when we are giving another, life cycle of the building, I think that the thing that we have to remember is that the existing bonus density, the existing density over and above what is available by right, that condition is continuing to persist, right? And that condition needs to continue to be mitigated in a way that we are giving up as a community if the building isn't being redeveloped. Now, I don't think that it follows that we need to expect the full basket of site plan mitigation conditions that we would expect if the building were to be completely redeveloped. And I also acknowledge that I'm probably doing a disservice and mischaracterizing the comment that was just made. So apologies to the extent for that to staff. But I think we have to remember that by continuing the lifespan of the building, we are by definition continuing the bonus density that the mitigation conditions are supposed to cover, and that the county when it negotiated those conditions in the first instance, was also amortizing the lifespan of the site plan mitigation conditions that were being negotiated. So I think that that applies to housing. It's also going to apply to other issues, and I think that we need to be mindful of that.
Thank you. Commissioner Patel?
I just want to align myself with Commissioner Weir's comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Sarli?
I guess I'm not fully following, or I'm seeking a little bit of clarification. I think you're correct, Commissioner Weir, that the mitigation is ongoing, but I think that was what I was trying to find out. The affordable housing element continues, even though it's now being adapted to a different use. And this adaptation to the different use it's providing a lot of community benefits inherently, because we're talking about an obsolete building. And I even asked staff if that is a term of art, which it is. So this is a building that, you know, probably is old enough that it doesn't have quite the community benefits. And again, this is a case by case, so it's difficult to sort of speak speculatively. But so I think if that structure had not had a contribution towards affordable housing at the time, I think your point is valid. But I think if the community had been sort of the impact of the higher structure, the bonus density, had been mitigated by the affordable housing, that affordable housing continues to stay in place, notwithstanding the lifespan, you know, of 60 years, however long the lease or the conditions are. I think, I guess I'm not seeing where we're missing or we're giving up the community benefit, right? I think the building is being renewed, so we're extending the lifespan, but I think that in and of itself is a bit of a benefit too. So I'm just, you know, trying to work through this issue a little bit.
So I'm acknowledging myself. I think that there are certainly benefits to adaptive reuse and to using the term of art, obsolete buildings and getting a second life in some ways out of them. But I don't think that, and I understand that that's a balancing of needs, but I don't think that that necessarily means that affordable housing or, you know, other, you know, site plan considerations that we would take if it was a new development should be pushed away simply because we are adapting and reusing, getting a benefit from that. And I think that's what this body is struggling with. And I think that it's reasonable for the county board to hear that that is where the conversation from this evening is going. So I have no recollection of who from the Planning Commission is representing us at November's meeting, because I don't memorize that information. Oh, thank you. I think that it will be, thank you, Mr. Robertson. I think that would be a fair thing for you to put forth to the board, that there is a lot to want and a lot to be appreciative of in this policy and as we're looking at these adaptive reuse considerations, but that, you know, how we prioritize, you know, what things can be, you know, let go of in that sort of process as well, whether it's affordable housing or other, you know, community benefit considerations, is something that, you know, there may not be a unanimity of thought between the planning commissioners on that particular item. Okay, I've acknowledged myself. Anybody else?
Just to clarify, I'm not disagreeing with Commissioner Weir. I'm just not sure that I understand. And I think your point is particularly salient. It's something that we ought to really alert the county board that this is an issue that we're really curious about.
Yeah. And, you know, we can advise them. That's what we're not hired to do because none of us are paid. But it's ultimately up to the county board to kind of take that and feedback and, you know, other, you know, community considerations and, you know, what they do with that will be determination they make. Commissioner Weir, I believe the next topic is yours. And what I wrote down is site plan mitigation condition. I'm hoping that triggers something for you.
We've sort of gotten into that with respect to one particular category of site plan mitigation conditions, but more generally, you know, I guess I want to ask how, you know, how do we, in theory, when we talk about site plan, when we talk about community benefits or site plan mitigation conditions, we are talking about efforts to mitigate the impact of development over and above what would be allowed by right. And it occurs to me that because of the way that we calculate things, because counting things is hard, that a different level of mitigation would be, may have been warranted for building X had it been built as a residential project 60 years ago than was warranted when it was built, or even 40 years ago. Let's talk about Ballston, right? When it was built as a commercial project. And so how are we, or what is being done to plan to be able to weigh apples against apples, right? And say, well, this building is being taken from 100% commercial to 50% commercial and 50% residential. Is there now a delta that needs to be caught up, right? That had it been, it would have more community benefits, let me be real careful, more site plan mitigation would have been needed if it had been, if it had been built as residential, and contrariwise, would less mitigation have been needed? And that's something that should also be considered in evaluating a proposal. And so I guess initially, I mean, I've sort of made a point that I think that this is something that should be thought about, but I want to ask staff, like, how are we doing the math on this to make sure that the right amount of mitigation is going to be landed upon?
Yeah, thank you. Good question, and very topical, and also very very thoughtful, obviously, in terms of the many levers we're trying to pull with this policy and in the implementation. So I'll start off by saying, I think when we went into this and really established in the policy as first as an idea, and now as something that's going to be in front of the board, as repurposing of obsolete office buildings as a public priority, was one to sort of elevate this conversation, right? Sort of, is the repurposing of obsolete office buildings in and of itself a mitigation of an existing condition? And the existing condition is a building that is not functioning, and that will have continually detrimental effects, not only in itself, and believe me, we're not thinking about the owner of this. We're thinking about the people that have to live near this building for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And so that allows the board to sort of have that conversation in a transparent way, albeit a conversation that I don't think is, as you raised, is cut or dry. I do think that when you talk about mitigation impacts, the development standards will still include a lot of standards relative to how a building should function, right? So this isn't sort of get your change of use, go through a process, and don't improve anything. If there's areas that need to improve in the public realm, in the way that the building frames the street, frames like all those sort of things can be and will be looked at relative. We're sort of setting up that checklist now so that we can inform the development community what to expect. But that is an important part of the mitigation impact, the mitigation of impact process, right? How does the building function and perform? So what we really have come down to is, that when you look at the options of mitigating, that there is and I think Arlington County has long had a practice of patience relative to our standards, push high and let the market come to it. That has sometimes effects where we see projects not getting started for 10, 20 years. We see projects that get site planned several times over. And that's a thoughtful way of the county sort of saying, we're willing to be willing to be patient for this to happen. I think in this case, we're asking the board if they want to be less patient and more urgent, do they have to maybe sort of think about how they may give in on some of those standards, not to a degree that the building's not going to function or the building's not going to be a quality building, but just in terms of their practices relative to new development. So I think those are all thoughtful things that we will discuss with the board, and I'm glad you brought it up, because I think it is a very important discussion to have of whether that, to the board's mind, actually meets the level of this being a public priority.
Thanks. I have one more question on this topic.
Okay.
So my second and last question on this topic comes out of some language on the staff report, page 6. There's a bullet list, the design of a streamlined process for projects that remove and repurpose obsolete office buildings should at a minimum consider. Second to last bullet, limiting the amending limiting or amending the application of current county site plan conditions and standards typically applied to conventional site plan development reviews if they are found to be inconsistent with the scale of the project, okay, that makes sense to me, and or impact the proposed project viability.
Yep.
And what I want to ask you is what limiting principles are being, what guardrails or limiting principles are being articulated in the black letter policy to keep that from being something that is absolute discretion on the part of the board to authorize projects with little or no site plan mitigation whatsoever, just because the financial the project viability becomes the mitigation itself. I can't think of any analog to that in how we go about planning in the county. So thank you.
Yeah, I'll just answer it quickly because I won't get into the legal ability of the board to do whatever the board wants to do. That is not my purview. So I want to try to answer that question of what allow the board to do. I do think that the reality is most of our site plans are negotiated with project viability, at least in the background as a conversation. Oftentimes there's the negotiation of a site plan condition and what can be accomplished through that site plan condition, but also what the project can afford. And I think that is something that comes to the board, and the board weighs those things often with, very discrete topics of what are we doing with these three things, and the board understands the trade-offs and needs to make that decision. So there's no black box trigger. There's no sort of, that if you're 1.2, you get this break. If you're 1.5, you can give more. I think we will really treat this much in the same way. I think what that language in the board report was meant to imply was that even more so in this case, that patience versus urgency discussion will be something the board may want to have a public discussion about. And again, that's that layer of what the board can sort of publicly discuss and how they can vote on it is outside of my purview, but I think is one that we at least want to ask the board whether they want to have relative to these projects.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm cognizant of the growing late hour, so we're going to move forward to the general topic. Any other catch-all items? Yes, Commissioner Bagley.
Indulge me for a minute because this is observational. So earlier tonight, we heard an item where Commissioner Sarli sort of lamented that instead of a 77-story building that could have been repurposed for additional housing, now it's going to just 14 townhouses. So obviously a potential loss of getting more housing for people. So I guess, and I applaud adaptive reuse. Will there in this process be sort of a proactive outreach to those who own these buildings in advance to encourage them to maybe be open to this, and maybe a matchmaker type of thing if you have somebody who's interested in creating? Because even going back to the historic thing where, it's like, oh, we want to have these things, but we wait so long and, it's not worth it to somebody. They don't see any incentives, just raise it and move on. It just seems like I want to make sure that we have some sort of outreach here planned so that we can try to get to these people early with this concept and make it sound exciting and, find the partners to put them together. So just an observation, and maybe we would have less of a building that possibly could have been repurposed with a lot more people in it than 14 townhouses, which are probably going to go for 1.8 or something million, which excludes a whole lot of people. So thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Sarli.
I just wanted to make a comment on the penultimate bullet on page 3, where, talking to this point a little bit, where the project redevelopment says the structure is demolished, but major elements of the existing building, such as podium or structure and parking, are maintained. I guess if we could put a certain percentage or a little bit more specificity on that, I would appreciate it. I think this just leaves it a little too open-ended as to, what is sufficient retention of the building. That's, of course, going back to my dead horse beating habit of preserving as much of the structure as possible.
Yes, and thank you for that clarification. Just to be clear about that bullet point, that refers to the holistic number of tools we have. So we wouldn't put that as adaptive reuse. We'd put that as, we hate calling because everyone hates it, adaptive reuse plus, or something that we talk about in a following study about if someone wanted to add significant density to a building but keep a main or a significant part of the building, how would we define that and what would be the process? As of November, if the board votes this policy and the ordinance through, that type of project would still go through a major 4.1 project until it's changed in the zoning ordinance. Just
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Sarli.
I guess I had another question about the public process and if we wanted to talk about how or any recommendations we have for staff regarding how we want this, how we've envisioned this commission
If you have a comment that
participating.
you'd like to make, you can make it.
I saw staff included on their presentation, the idea of having essentially like a PC SWAT team of 2 commissioners that can be called on reasonably short notice to meet with staff and coordinate, whether it needs to go to an SPRC review or if, this is the right thing. And then also that team then reports back to the planning commission. I thought that was an adequate sort of mitigation where we could be fairly quick on responding to the process and keep it within the 150 days or less goal.
How would identifying those 2 planning commissioners for that, how would that work?
I have to admit, I'm not an expert on your bylaws, but I think the discussion that we had was that the chair or someone else could sort of nominate 2 people to be sort of on a working group. Obviously, it can't be.
So it would be the
2.
same 2 people.
Yeah, that I think is up to you. I don't think I think it can't be more than 2.
Okay.
I would personally recommend that it just be random 2 people and we can cycle through as a whole body and not so much as a separate committee.
I think that would be my preference as well, is that it be randomly assigned. But I probably won't be chair by the time this goes into effect, so yeah, not my call. Okay. Anything else in the general comment box? Okay. I think we're ready for a motion then. Who would like to make a motion?
I guess I can make a motion, assuming we don't have any amendments to what was on the
Well, I
staff
think you can
report.
make a people I don't know if people have an amendment or not. They can either amend or make a different motion, or we'll go from there.
All right.
Commissioner Sarli, please.
I will start. I move that the Planning Commission recommend that the county board adopt the following elements related to the Commercial Market Resiliency Initiative, CMRI, transformation of commercial office buildings. A, resolution, attachment 1 of the staff report to adopt the county board policy on the transformation of commercial office buildings in Arlington, attachment 4 of the staff report. B, the ordinance, attachment 2 of the staff report to amend, reenact, and recodify Article 15.5 of the Arlington County zoning ordinance relating to the establishment of new special exception site plan category, adaptive reuse amendment with specific criteria and methods to create an alternative process for the conversion of obsolete and vacant office buildings, attachment 5 of the staff report. And C, a resolution, attachment 3 of the staff report for the consideration and initiation of an amendment of the Department of Community Planning, Housing and Development related fees as depicted on the zoning fee schedule. We're not supposed to do that one, Jill?
You do not have to do that one. It's just the board has to authorize. We'll come back to you.
So that's premature. Okay, so we stop at B.
Okay, so just to clarify, maybe for the record, I'm sorry, Commissioner Sarli, could you restate without going into C, could you read the motion again for
Yes, apologies for
items
that.
A and B? I think that would be helpful.
I move that the Planning Commission recommend the county board adopt the following elements related to Commercial Market Resiliency Initiative, transformation of commercial office buildings. A, resolution, attachment 1 of the staff report to adopt the county board policy on the transformation of commercial office buildings in Arlington, attachment 4 of the staff report. B, ordinance, attachment 2 of the staff report to amend, reenact, and recodify Article 15.5 of the Arlington County zoning ordinance relating to establishing a new special exception site plan category, adaptive reuse amendment with specific criteria and methods to create an alternative process for the conversion of obsolete and vacant office building. Attachment 5 of the staff report, period.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Sarley. I appreciate that. Is there anyone making
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion among commissioners? Okay, we will move to a vote. Commissioner Bagley,
Aye.
Commissioner Weir,
Aye.
Commissioner Lantomi,
Aye.
Commissioner Robertson,
Aye.
Commissioner Sarley,
Aye.
Commissioner Streiner,
Aye.
Commissioner Patel,
Aye.
Commissioner Steinberger votes aye as well. The motion passes 8-0. Thank you very much. I think this was a very fulsome discussion, and we are appreciative of the detailed responses from staff.
Great, thank you very much.
Okay, we stand in recess until Thursday evening, where we can come back for more fun.
That is correct. But for those of you who are present, I'd like to know who will be present on Thursday. Okay. Right. Got you, Daniel. Peter. Okay, Leo. Okay.
Do we have?
Devanshi?
I teach class on Thursday nights, Giselle.
Okay, thank you. Tony?
I will be there.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay. Who went now?
I heard it.
You did not. That was a hallucination. Okay, thank you very much.